and welcome back to the Narcissist Layer. I'm your host, Hope J. I am the founder and president of the Center for Hope of Western New York. At the Center for Hope, we offer hope, help, and healing from narcissistic abuse. We are a nonprofit organization with a mission to provide legal advocacy, mental health support, financial advisement, holistic healing services, and education to help you down the path from victim to survivor. You can find out more about our services by visiting our website at centerforhopewny.org. Please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn at Center for Hope WNY for helpful information on recovery from narcissistic abuse. Welcome back, and I am so happy to say that we are once again going to be interviewing Lynn Catalano. And Lynn Catalano is a board member and vice president and chair of the fundraising committee at the Center for Hope of Western New York. And this is the second in our 5-part podcast series where we're going to be talking to Lynn about her recently published book, Wrecking Ball Relationships: How to Identify, Live with, or Leave the Narcissist in Your Life. Welcome back, Lynn.
Well, thank you, Hope. It's such a pleasure to be with you. And I'm excited about our topics for today, for sure.
So, Lynn, just before we get into our topic today, can you just remind our listeners how they can purchase your book? I just want to give you an opportunity to.
Thank you so much.
To tell people, yes.
Yes, please. It is available at Amazon.com, both in the paperback form and ebook. And it's available on barnesandnoble.com in both forms as well. So thank you so much.
Of course. And today, Lynn, we're going to be talking about one of the most important topics, I believe, when you're coming into this realization that you may have a narcissist in your life. And as you and I were chatting a little bit before we started today, today's topic is narcissistic injury, narcissistic rage, and the silent treatment. And the topic of the chapter of your book is the ruin of rage storms. That's the chapter of your book where you delve into these issues about narcissistic injury, narcissistic rage, and the silent treatment. So there's so much that we can discuss, but I want to just ask you right off the bat, what is a rage storm? And why did you name your chapter The Ruin of Rage Storms? Because that's such an interesting phrase and an interesting way to phrase it.
Well, first of all, I think that rage storms should connote a very dramatic event in your mind, right? And so that's certainly what I was trying to capture, because that's what happens with a narcissist. So what is a rage storm? Well, they occur when the narcissist has suffered a narcissistic injury. So that's a lot of words. Yeah. What's a narcissistic injury, right?
Yeah, I think it's important to kind of define these terms, because if people are just beginning their journey, they may not understand what is a narcissistic injury and narcissistic rage. So it would be helpful if you could define those terms as you're talking.
So a narcissistic injury is what happens when somehow they have experienced some perceived offense to their narcissistic supply. Again, more words, right? Narcissistic supply, I think we spoke about this last time, is really the praise, the reverence, the recognition.
Yep.
Yes. Everything that feeds their ego, right? That gives them positive feelings. They seek narcissistic supply. It sounds like something that a zombie would go seeking, but it really is. They need it like oxygen. So right. If they can't get it from you, they move on to a new supply.
But a narcissistic injury, Lynn, is what occurs when there's some sort of a stop to that supply, because right. It's halted when someone may what? They may confront the narcissist, they may criticize the narcissist, they may withdraw their attention for some reason. There's some sort of an event that happens where the narcissist is perceiving that there might be some stoppage to that oxygen, right? To what it is that they need to sustain themselves. And they suffer a narcissistic injury. What does that look like?
So, for many narcissists, and certainly in my experience, if you ask them to be accountable for their actions, that's an injury. If you challenge their decision-making, injury. If you criticize them, injury. If you don't give VIP status, and this is so important, and I know it sounds ridiculous, and it is, but if they don't receive it, they are put off for the whole night. Like if they got a bad table, if they weren't recognized, if they didn't get whatever they think they have coming, it sets them off. If they're not the center of attention, and I can tell you stories about that one.
Right. I mean, so Lynn, this is a really nice segue, because in your book, and again, I want to direct people back to the book because it's such a great source of information. But in your book, you give some really great cultural examples of narcissistic injury. And I'd like for you to just go back to your book. And I believe one of them had to do with King Lear, perhaps?
Oh, yeah.
And maybe you could just briefly tell the story just to illustrate what narcissistic injury looks like, because then we're going to use that as the foundation to then talk about what happens when a narcissist experiences narcissistic injury, which is what we're here today to talk about, which is narcissistic rage storm, which can take a couple of different forms, right?
Correct.
It can be the overt rage that when we talk about rage, we're accustomed to people acting out. Right. But there's also the passive aggressive form of a narcissistic injury, which is the silent treatment. And I want to make sure that we give equal time to both forms of narcissistic rage. But I'd like you to share a little bit, I thought some really good stories that you gave in your book about narcissistic injury.
Well, even if you've never read the story of King Lear, Lear is a typical narcissist, right? He wants what all narcissists wants. He wants people to around him to pay attention to him. He wants them to follow his directions. That's so important to a narcissist. They need to be the line leader and show him respect, especially in public. And when he doesn't get what he wants, he flies into a rage. And he has a rage storm, right? He's angry because his daughters, Reagan and Goneril, tell him what to do. Oh my gosh, this is such a crime. The idea that your daughter would suggest something for you to do. And then Reagan has the unmitigated gall to tell Lear he's at fault. Oh my God, he made a mistake. He doesn't appreciate her and that he should apologize. Well, I don't know that you can tell a narcissist worse things. And you can almost feel the storm coming. Right. If you know, right? And from
I think a lot of people, Lynn, who are in relationships with NPDs or people with narcissistic traits, they know when the storm is coming, right? Which is why people will often say things like they're walking on eggshells all the time, right? Because they're trying to avoid this experience of narcissistic rage because it is so devastating to be on the other side of a rage storm, isn't it, Lynn?
Yeah. Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
It really is. And I also wanted, I'm sorry, I also just wanted to ask you one more question that's kind of related to that.
Yeah.
Which is what is the difference? Because I think it's really important for our listeners to understand, because everyone gets angry, right? We all get angry in relationships. Right. What is the difference between anger and narcissistic rage? Like if you had to describe that to somebody who didn't understand these concepts, how would you describe that?
So I think, first of all, just to preface this by saying we all experience anger. Anger is a very healthy emotion. And if I believe that the difference between healthy expression of anger and a narcissistic rage storm is your own emotional intelligence. Because if you understand how to recognize and regulate your own emotions, then you understand that saying, I'm angry about this, is very healthy, and saying, it makes me angry when. However, when you're in a rage storm and you just completely explode, implode, however it happens, because you didn't get what you wanted, or someone didn't do what you wanted, or somehow you perceive offense to something, so you fly out of control and you yell and scream, or you seethe and you write horrifying things on social media, or you write horrifying notes to people. However you express that rage, that's not a healthy expression of your emotions.
Right. And it's important for people to understand, I believe, when you're considering the relationship that you're in, as you're listening to us talk about narcissistic rage today, if every time that you attempt to resolve a conflict in your relationship, you are met with either this rage storm, or in the alternative, the stonewalling silent treatment, which are the two sort of inverse tactics that narcissists use when they've experienced narcissistic injury, I think it's a pretty good gauge to decide for yourself that you may be in a relationship with a disordered person. It's the way that people resolve, or when you're dealing with narcissists, do not resolve conflict, that is one of the most important things to assess in your relationships with other people. Wouldn't you agree with that, Lynn?
Yeah, I actually think that's an incredible litmus test for your relationship. I can tell you, when things were fine, things were fine. And then when a conflict arose, that's when the rubber met the road.
Exactly. It's when conflict arises. And the thing about a narcissistic injury that I know that I experienced, and I know from reading your book you also experienced, is it causes a person to scratch their head and kind of say to themselves, oh my God, like, I don't understand this overreaction to something that seems so easily resolvable. And I was wondering if you could give, because I know you give some examples in your book, if you could give some examples about what it's like to be on the receiving end of that, and the sorts of things that can set off a narcissist that to those of us that are not disordered are so small, but to them are just the end of the world.
Well, for me, my personal experience with my narcissist, I never raised my voice. I never got outwardly angry at him. I never said terrible things to him. I never said things that you would think would trigger this type of reaction. What I did, what my crime was I asked him why he did something. I told him he hurt me. These were my outward crimes.
Right.
And I challenged the way he did something.
Right.
And when I did that, and then the worst thing I ever did was I asked him to be accountable for his actions. And what that did was that set off a rage storm of epic proportions that ended in a 3-year silent treatment.
Right.
And that I learned a lot about control, because I had no control over the situation. I didn't cause that.
Well, but Lynn, isn't that the very essence of this kind of behavior? Like, I've had conversations with a lot of different people about whether or not narcissists know what they're doing when they are engaging in these kinds of behaviors, particularly these rage storms and or like we're going to talk about in a little bit, the inverse, the silent treatment, right? And some people think that narcissists have no awareness or ability to decide how they're reacting to a narcissistic injury, while others believe that it is completely calculated and that it is in essence a power and control tactic. If I do this, I'm going to get that reaction. So Lynn, I wanted to ask you a little bit, we've been talking about rage storms and we've been talking about how rage storms start and the sorts of triggers that cause them to happen. But can you, other than, you know, somebody raging at you, like yelling and screaming and things of that nature, can you give some other examples of demonstrably what a rage storm might look like to be on the receiving end of it? And talk also a little bit about, you know, the smear campaign, because I think the smear campaign, it kind of figures into the rage storm, because not only is the narcissist raging at you, but they are also attempting to turn others against you. And that's what we were talking about before the break. We were talking about whether or not this behavior is, whether or not the narcissist is aware of this or has an awareness of it, and it's premeditated, or whether or not it is you know, something that the narcissist doesn't have any control over. And I was going to weigh in and say, my belief is that this is premeditated behavior, that this is another example of power and control, the way that narcissists attempt to control people in relationships. And by raging at them and having them be in fear all the time, that if they confront, if they try to hold somebody accountable, if they do some of these things that you had just explained, that they're going to be on the receiving end of a rage storm and or the silent treatment, that tends to keep people in line. That tends to keep people walking on eggshells. That tends to keep people afraid to confront the narcissist on their behaviors. Yes. So I personally believe that it is another tool in their manipulation toolbox, but I'm interested in what you think about that. So yeah, what's your opinion?
I must tell you, I completely agree. I believe that they do not care about your feelings and emotions because they're not capable of caring. And while, yes, this is a disorder, and they you know, I describe it in my book as that their personality keeps glitching, that they can't get out of their own way, that they have this emotional glitch. And that's the way I have to see it, because I have to know that it's not a 100% malicious, that this is not coming from a place where their only intention is to hurt the people close to them, which is often what it feels like. I feel like my narcissist is not capable of any other perspective but his own. And again, this goes back to the disorder. So if he can only see that, then he only sees things in his false reality, and he only sees things the way that they affect him. So again, your emotions and your feelings and your thoughts do not matter unless it affects him directly, right? And as a result of that, his goal is to use people for his own benefit. Right. And if you challenge or criticize, or he perceives some offense along the way, then he's going to spin out of control into, he's going to have a narcissistic injury and spin into this rage storm. And what's it going to look like? So then once you go into this rage storm, then the smear campaign comes in. And so now it's all about discrediting you, because whatever your feelings and emotions are hold no value to him. So he needs to discredit you and portray you as crazy, or imbalanced or somehow not realistic to his needs, which you're probably not realistic to his needs. I mean,
well, right. I mean, I agree with everything that you said. I don't know that we got to the crux of the question though, which I think maybe is, not that you or I can really answer what's inside of somebody else's mind, but with this particular disorder, I believe that, I agree with everything that you said in terms of, these rage storms are really, we're dealing with somebody with the emotional capacity of a 2-year-old, right? If they don't get what they want immediately, what they want, the way they want it, when they want it, how they want it, they're going to act out. And you often hear people, when they're talking about this, they refer to them as 2-year-olds. However, in my opinion, and again, in my experiences, I think that narcissists have an awareness of how their behavior is going to affect other people. I don't think they care about how their behavior is going to affect other people. So if they know that by withdrawing their affection, for example, we're going to talk about the silent treatment in a minute. If they understand enough about you, that you have abandonment issues and that you feel insecure in the relationship, and rightly so, because I'm sure they've done many, many things to make you feel that way, right? And if they withdraw their affection and they refuse to speak to you, like you talked about earlier, they won't answer your phone calls. They won't answer your texts. They won't even look at you, and you're in the same, place with them and living in the same house with them, for, God's sake. They know that behavior is going to harm you because they've watched that behavior, how it's affected you in the past. They've watched you cry. They've watched you break down. Perhaps they've watched you beg them to talk to them and plead and please. And what did I do? And I'm sorry. So they know how that behavior impacts you. They just simply don't care. They don't care that it's going to harm you because they have no empathy for other people. They want what they want, which is for you to apologize, take responsibility for everything, come crawling back, right? That's what they want. So in my opinion, this is manipulation. It is a tool in their manipulation toolbox to put pressure on their supply, the people in their lives that they depend on. Don't forget, as you said earlier, they depend on us to such an extent that they require us to fall back in line. And how dare you criticize me? How dare you challenge me? How dare you try to hold me accountable? I'm going to punish you for that now. I'm going to punish you by raging and yelling and screaming and criticizing you and making you feel like you're this big. And in some instances, Lynn, maybe even it crosses over to physical violence, right? So there's some other forms of punishment for this narcissistic injury, or in the inverse, some narcissists don't rage, or they only rage on occasion, but their rage, it can take the passive aggressive form of the silent treatment. And let's segue into the silent treatment, because I don't want to give it short shrift. It is such an egregious form, in my opinion, of manipulation, and let's call it what it is, abuse, okay? That I think for anyone who has been on the receiving end of the silent treatment, they really would like to hear about, what does this entail? Why do they do this? How can I deal with this in my life? So I'm going to shoot it back over to you.
For me, I think the silent treatment was my breaking point. It brought immense clarity to my experience, because I had never put a label on who he was or what he was until I realized how cruel and unusual the punishment is from the silent treatment, and the fact that it's a form of manipulation and of emotional abuse. I had never even thought of it that way because my father's behavior was normalized in my house.
Right. And I think it's normalized in many homes where there are, emotional tyrants with their reign of terror over their household, right? Whether it's a father, a husband, if this is how they deal with
Conflict.
narcissistic injury and conflict, then we're all conditioned to try to figure out how to not cause that reaction, right?
Right.
But
Right.
we all know that that's not possible because narcissists are injured at the tiniest little things, like you just said earlier. And it really
Yeah.
doesn't have anything to do with us. It has to
Right.
do with the disorder. Like,
Right.
this, what I learned, and I'm sure you also learned as well, is it didn't matter what I did. It didn't matter if I kept quiet. It didn't matter if I tried in advance to be proactive and do everything that I thought might make him happy. Didn't matter, because he would always find fault with something, right? Isn't that what they do?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. They find fault and then they project the blame back onto the other person. So let's talk about the silent treatment, Lynn. First of all, what does that look like? And how is it different from, I'm upset with you and I don't want to talk to you right now, but I'm going to, again, come back in an hour or 2 hours and we're going to have a productive conversation. What's the difference?
Well, most likely they're not coming back in 2 hours to have a productive conversation. If they do,
well, I'm saying, how is it different? Like, again, like, how does it look different from a person who's just upset and needs to take a time out, right?
Right. Well, they're not, because they don't want to resolve anything. This is,
that's the difference, right?
That's it.
Yeah.
It's purposeful avoidance. Because, my father liked to say to me, I don't want to rehash the who said, did what. You don't? I said, how are we ever going to get past it? Like, granted, okay, I'm a talker. And I don't think it's a, men are from Mars and women are from Venus issue. I think it's because I know that when I have a conflict with my husband, we talk about it. So I know it's not a male-female thing. But here's the thing. My father doesn't want to talk about it because you might shine a light on his bad behavior and he might have to accept responsibility for what he said or done. So why would he ever want to talk about it? But I got to tell you, growing up, like, regular people, like, not just family, like people today say things to me like, well, I must have done something right. Your father's talking to me today. This is not normal behavior and this should not be acceptable. Like,
yeah, it's so true. Anybody in their lives, anyone, siblings, parents, friends, pretty much anyone who's in a narcissist's life has been subjected to the silent treatment at one point or another, right?
So I think there are subtle different forms of the silent treatment because, and I think you've experienced this as well, when you live in the same home with someone and they give you the silent treatment, it's kind of different because they might nod their head at you or they might, pass the salt, but they're not going to look you in the eye and have a conversation. But for me, I had that silent treatment. Then I also had silent treatment where we were on vacation together. And it was my husband and my 2 small children and my father in a villa together in a paradise, in a beautiful place. And he would speak to strangers with great charisma and interest and excitement. And then we would sit at the table because he didn't avoid us. We took every meal together. It was like trapped in paradise together. And he would look at his fingernails instead of looking at any one of us.
Right.
And
Lynn, so just because I'm looking at the time and we have about 7 minutes, but you're describing like what it's like to be on the receiving end of a silent treatment. They don't have any shame, do they? They will ignore you and refuse to acknowledge you and go, like you're saying, go about their business and talk to everyone else and continue to be the charming person, but you're the person that has been banished to Siberia, right? And you have to sit and they want you to sit and reflect on what it is, this terrible thing that you must have done, right, to deserve this punishment. And I will myself contribute to this, but I want to ask you first, what does it feel like to be on the receiving end of this, Lynn? Because in my opinion, it is the single most soul-crushing experience to be on the receiving end of one of these silent treatments.
Yes. you're not given an opportunity to say anything. You're completely cut off. You do not exist to them. It is the cruelest of all the punishments.
Right? Because most of us, and I've heard people say this before, and it's extreme, but I've heard people say, I would rather that this person yell, scream, throw something, even hit me, than refuse to acknowledge my very existence. Because what does it do? It erases you as a person. You cease to exist to that person's life. 1 minute you're their daughter, or you're their girlfriend, or you're their wife, and the next moment you're what? You're no more important than a potted plant or some other inanimate object. And to be on the receiving end of that, and I know it may sound extreme to people who haven't had this happen to them, but I think it's two things. I think it's the level of importance that that person holds in your life, and in addition to that, how quickly and severely and cruelly they can cut you off. It's terrifying, isn't it?
Not only that, it makes you doubt that they ever loved you.
Right.
Like, how could they ever love you if it's so easy for them to cut you off like that, right, and find you to be irrelevant and unimportant.
Right. And over time, Lynn, they condition you, right? Because you grow to become so scared and afraid that if you say or do the wrong thing, that they're going to cut you off again. Right. That you're constantly walking on eggshells in fear that you say or do the wrong thing and it's off to the races, and you're going to have a whole nother situation where, you don't know when this person will speak to you and be willing to resolve a conflict. And frankly, it's a horrible way to live. It is a terrible way to live, because you are constantly in fight or flight. You don't realize it when you're in the relationship, but your anxiety is so heightened all the time because you're so afraid of when the other shoe is going to drop, that it's a horrible experience. I can't state it enough.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. I talk a lot about hypervigilance because you are always on the edge of your seat, wondering what's going to happen. And guess what I discovered as an adult? And this is a horrible lesson. Here I had thought, what I don't want to say or do anything to offend. I coach everyone around the table. Don't talk about this because that sets him off.
And that's another thing, right? You're trying to control all the children and everyone else. Yeah.
We couldn't be ourselves. We were never at peace. Okay. Right. And then here's what I realized. I didn't do anything this last time that he walked away from me. I didn't do anything.
Lynn, isn't that the thing though? Like I said earlier, it's not about us.
Well, that's it.
Right.
That's it.
It's about them. This is about their experience, as you said earlier, right?
Everything is a competition to them.
Right.
And his perception was beyond my control, right? His perception was
that really is the lesson. And, we have a couple minutes, and I'd like to try to wrap this up on a positive note. We've talked about the torment of living with a narcissist, of what it's like when they experience a narcissistic injury, of what it's like to be on the receiving end of narcissistic rage and the silent treatment. But you do give, that's the thing that I love so much about your book, because you go through all of this stuff, but always at the end, you do end on an uplifting, positive note to give people ideas and suggestions of how to, if they want to continue, like in your case, because he's your father, you have made some concessions to stay in a relationship with him. For a lot of people who are in intimate partner relationships with narcissists, they need to leave. And that's a good choice, in my opinion. Setting those boundaries and getting out of these relationships are the way to go. But you do give a lot of good suggestions of how to deal with this sort of stuff in your book, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Because guess what? If you're on the receiving end of the silent treatment for any period of time, if you're on the receiving end of a narcissistic rage storm, it's not normal. It's not your fault. And you need to reevaluate that relationship.
And on that note, Lynn, I'm going to say thank you so much again for joining us. And I wanted to tell everybody, because I did write it down this time, our next episodes will be airing on May 10th, June 14th, and July 12th. So stay tuned to the Narcissist Slayer so that we can continue interviewing Lynn Catalano about her book. Coming up on May 10th is Gaslighting. On June 14th we're going to be talking about romantic relationships. And on July 12th, we're going to be talking about toxic bosses and the toxic workplace.
Ooh.
Thank you so much.